What's a secret you can reveal now that your NDA has expired? So, a friend of mine was paralyzed while riding a trek. He and his family signed the NDA because they needed the money to pay for healthcare. The quick release in the front tire was faulty, and the front tire came off while he was going down a hill. He was thrown and instantly paralyzed. The lawyer found out that Trek had paid off multiple people who were paralyzed by the same quick release issue and was able to get a very large settlement. I eventually found out about the NDA pushed by Trek, and I haven't bought one since. I always share this story when I hear that someone is looking to buy a mountain bike. Next story. So, before Redbox swapped to chip and pin credit card readers circa 2021, the old swipe-style readers stored your credit info in a text file. I mean, plain text on the computer in the kiosk that anyone could have accessed. When they upgraded, there was zero plan to go into each computer and delete that file. There are 30K plus Redbox kiosks floating around with a file of credit card numbers and names to go with them. Next story. So, I used to train Facebook's moderation AI back in 2016-ish era. All of the conspiracy theories about Facebook purposefully targeting content is false, and it was human error. I saw the rise of the QAnon far-right in real time, and one of the biggest challenges was containing all of the bots that would spread that information. Working there also made me realize that MAGA was never a real political party. Facebook had ways to decipher who was a real person and who wasn't, and that a much more powerful group or groups had almost full control over digital content through bot farms. We would flag one account, and 3 more would appear with slightly different language/content to avoid chain banning. The role it made me realize how powerful a clever person using AI, information, money, and bot farms are. Someone controlling outrage, as in creating it for both sides, can do a lot of things online or offline. I firmly believe that outrage content should not be monetized after that experience. Everybody, the dead internet theory, it's alive and well, or dead and well if you think about it. And you know what? All the people saying that we're AI over here on Undersparked, those are AI themselves. They are robots. How can you hear the pain and suffering in my voice and think that I am not human? I'm hurt and offended. Anyway, next story. So, there are some natural gas pipes in the US that are not documented in official records. No conspiracy, just bad record keeping from many years ago. There are also many natural gas pipes that should be replaced immediately for safety reasons. The general state of the pipeline infrastructure is deteriorating, and virtually no one cares. I worry about an increase in natural gas explosions in residential areas in the coming years. Next story. The HotJava web browser from Sun Microsystems, 1997, was not written entirely in Java, despite the company's claims. They used system calls to functions written in C to execute capabilities impossible in Java, most notably printing. I do worry that this revelation could shake the industry's faith in Sun Microsystems, but the truth must be told. Next story. Worked at JP Morgan. Innocent people's accounts were sometimes closed because fraud teams and investigators did not look deeply enough into transaction activity and customer information. I blame the company for not giving employees enough time to investigate and analyze cases properly. They are running through accounts and transactional history due to time crunch and output metrics. For example, they might see a student receiving $10,000 a month and assume money laundering, when in reality the funds were coming from relatives or a family member who was a doctor helping cover tuition and living expenses. These somewhat rare, unfortunate situations happened regularly, and over time the team became desensitized to them. If your account was ever blocked or closed for no clear reason, this may be part of why. Next story. So, no NDA, but something I learned that I probably shouldn't have. I was working in an aircraft hangar that would strip and respray full commercial planes. One day, I noticed a fleet of Boeing employees setting up on the hangar floor, and when I asked why, they said that one of the new planes had a hard landing, and when they stripped it down, they noticed cracks running the whole way along the hull. I said, presumably it gets dismantled and investigated for weaknesses. They looked at me, and then they were like, nah, she's headed to Africa now. Basically, it's too much money to scrape/write off, so they send it to a country where if something goes wrong, it's not as big of a news story. Every industry cuts corners and hides crap, even the ones you pray shouldn't. Next story. I worked for a pyramid scheme that sold fake phone contracts and pretended they signed people up to new home phone and mobile plans. I didn't find out it was fake until after I left. But really, we would just take their money and invest it heavily in customer support that would send you in a loop until you gave up. At one of our corporate events, they were giving out those huge novelty checks to the top earners, remember pyramid scheme, and it got so ridiculous. I'm talking into the millions for monthly earning. They had to stop the event because because it was looking too suspicious to anyone with a brain. The company eventually got found out, but because they operated under shell corporations, they just killed the name and moved on under a different name. The kicker on top of all of that is that they called it Cobra, like the bad guys in G.I. Joe Cobra. Next story. I worked on a certain sci-fi show that starred a male and female duo who worked for the FBI. On a location shoot in a heritage building, the male lead was supposed to kick in a fake door we had made. He ended up kicking in one of the real location doors and got us banned from using that location in the future. I also worked on another show where one of the lead actors had a mental breakdown and we had to shoot the last 2 episodes without him. There were lots of shots of his body doubles back, as well as a couple deepfake shots where his face got pasted on in post. Watching the show, you might not notice, but if you go in with the actual knowledge, it's obvious as hell. I'm being vague though because my NDAs don't technically expire. We just get to a point where no one cares. Next story. Much of what you hear on the radio, on call-in shows, prank shows, and general reality segments is fake and performed by actors. I was a contractor for a company that hired actors for this purpose. It was long enough ago that I don't really remember all of what I did, but I clearly remember playing a person getting pranked by a radio show host. And I remember a scenario where another actor and myself had to pretend to have gone on a date that the show set up. The first one was a recording to air later, so we tried a bunch of different reactions and lines, and the second was live on air. It's usually structured improvisation with just a few details set. Next story. Not technically under an NDA, but I know something the company doesn't want the public to know, so I feel like it fits. I worked for PetSmart years ago, and every holiday season, they sell Chance and Lucky plushies for a donation drive. You buy one of the plushies for $5, and PetSmart will take it and donate it to a hospital or police station or whatever. The plushies, they cost PetSmart about 25 cents each. So every donation is $4.75 in PetSmart's pocket, as well as a tax write-off since they're donations. To top it off, all the plushies that don't sell get donated regardless. Morally, it's pretty reprehensible, profiting off of donations to children's hospitals and humanitarian shelters, especially when if you didn't spend $5 on one, it would go there regardless. Edit. The tax write-off isn't the focal point of this. That's normal corpo bullcrap. The shady part was charging a 2,000% markup for an item that would still get donated regardless if it was purchased or not. Next story. So, there are a few things I can tell you. There are many predators who have escaped conviction on technicalities, which include prosecution budgets running out. Then, a lot of charities, including the Big Five in Adelaide, don't actually make that much money for their charitable operations, with their senior employees using and abusing the organizations for their own personal ambitions, gains, power plays, and even revenge on others. Then, a lot of politicians in Australia belonging to a main party that are not in power are all involved in really nasty wealth building that is too big to fail, are abusing government services in the same way as above. Continuing, while Australia loves to bash low-end welfare recipients as bludgers and fraudsters, in my entire time investigating those who were genuinely ripping off the system, were less than 2%. Conviction rate and costs involved were enough to fund a small country for the results that were laughable, meant as a muscle flex. And finally, the biggest welfare bludgers in Australia are large corporations and big business. They receive so much government money and have access to government resources, powers, and perks that would make the normal person's head spin. They love cookers ranting about it because it makes it seem so much more far-fetched than it is. The fact that certain people and business heads in this country can call whoever is in power at a council, state, federal level, and at best lobby, and worse start making threats to politicians that the public struggles to hold accountable, should scare people. Next story. So, my NDA will never expire, but here's a fun fact. NDAs cannot cover crimes. You cannot commit a crime against a person, for instance, sex trafficking or SA, then have them sign an NDA to never tell anyone about it. So this is for any woman who signs an NDA because their boss was inappropriate or their famous ex-boyfriend doesn't want them talking about his abuse. You can. There is no NDA on this planet that allows criminals to keep you from talking about their crimes against you. And more people need to know this. Next story. BlackBerry outsourced their tech support from Canada to the United States and then outsourced it from the United States to the Philippines. This was all in 2012. Now, if it doesn't sound like a big deal, it's because, in my opinion, it wasn't. But we had this ass NDA about how we weren't allowed to say the company we actually worked for. If asked, we were supposed to say we lived in Canada. I was there during the transition, and the service quality dropped substantially. Immediately, the company I worked for also told the in-house call auditors to F F us up on our audits to make it easier to sell the idea of building the call center in Asia. I helped a legally blind, minimal sight woman learn how to use her tablet with the accessibility features it had. She gave me a glowing survey after the call. It was so good, they printed out the survey on a floor-to-ceiling-size plastic panel and mounted it so it was the first thing you saw stepping into the office. Well, guess what? I failed the audit for that call. I got marked down 2% points every time our voices were overlapping for interrupting the caller. Every time it happened, I said sorry and let them talk. It's a call center. There is a delay on the line. I got like a 42% score on the call, despite the caller giving me a 10 out of 10 and glowing review. Now, that part doesn't have anything to do with the NDA. It was just a crappy company. At one point, I asked HR to see the NDA again because I wanted to see the specific terms, and they wouldn't give it to me. Next story. I am a former copy editor. I caught a case of egregious plagiarism by a very well-respected author, clever enough to avoid the software that can be used. Unfortunately for him, I noticed the syntax shift and went full Poirot investigation mode. As for me, I got paid a big bonus lump sum of money and my wage was immediately increased by 50% forever for averting what could have been catastrophic reputation of the publishing house and financially damaging if the other author had ever sued them. I noticed it the same week it was due to be sent out to print. Plagiarism is far more common than people realize, and it can, in the worst-case scenario, bankrupt a publishing house. The author in question who stole another's work was blacklisted for life when I dug out the original source and stopped the book going to print ever for this very reason. Next story. So, Capitol Hill is totally run by 20-year-old unpaid interns. The congressmen and their paid staff are rarely around or accessible. Most of the constituent letters are disposed of, never even read by anyone. At most, they are skimmed by said unpaid interns. Constituent phone calls are handled by the interns as well, and we just placate callers as best we can until they hang up. We never take notes or pass their complaints on. Only those representing super important organizations get escalated to a rarely accessible, higher-up individual. The press releases, written by 20-year-old unpaid interns, would be printed verbatim, just with the journalists', congressmen's, paid staff members' names slapped on it, rather than yours. Source was a 20-year-old unpaid intern in a congressional office at Capitol Hill in 2009. Next story. No NDA, but when I worked at McDonald's a long time ago, we would keep chicken products, veggie, and fish burgers in the warming drawer all day instead of the recommended 20 minutes. Also, when you made up burgers and put them on the rack, you put a number behind it to say when they need to be thrown out, usually 5 or 10 minutes. Managers would repeatedly change the numbers when it got quiet, so a burger could end up sat there for an hour before it was sold. I won't eat any fast food restaurant now, but when I did, I would always ask, usually for like a slight variation such as no onions to ensure that I got a fresh burger. And final thing for McDonald's, I started working there at 16. One night I did a close and the manager, M40s, told me I would be a lot more attractive if I had bigger boobs. It was just me, him, and another male. It really shook me up and I never did a closing shift again. Next story. Walmart pays department managers to spy on competitors. They have a handheld scanner device they give you to go to other places and scan their price tags. Those all go into a big database to keep track of how much they should price their own products to keep people coming in. The workers are told if they meet resistance to never mention Walmart and deny any wrongdoing. Next story. Sandvik Mining and Construction in the USA hires active Nazis and does more to protect them than the people who bring the issue up. I found an active Nazi in a $500,000 customer report because that beanbag decided to include his 4-inch SS tattoo on his wrist and a picture of a failed component in his report. When I brought this up, it was initially pushed under the rug, and then I was met with a performance improvement plan or be fired in 30 days. I've worked 20 plus years in mining without so much as a slap on the wrist, but I quit the following Monday and let anyone know about it at any opportunity that I get. Next story. Worked at a pharmacy a long time ago. Every employee was required to monitor the expiration date of a certain medicine category. Usually seniors pharmacist would be responsible for psychiatric meds, a junior pharmacist for antibiotics, and technicians would split the rest. Well, a new retail pharmacist manager was hired. She forgot to put erectile dysfunction drugs on the board when splitting the responsibilities, and we ended up selling expired Viagra for over a month or so, and no clients noticed. Next story. So, why were the original Nokia mobile phones, I believe the 3110s, so durable? Testing. During some excursion to one of the production sites, I saw the pneumatic testing rig that would lift the phone's mechanical prototype to some height, bonk, let it free fall to the ground, and repeat the cycle some 10,000 times overnight. The early prototypes, of course, disintegrated to smithereens, but for later prototypes, Nokia had to replace the floor with a more durable one. Next story. I am the reason an entire national company had to rewrite their employee handbook. I documented all of the shady ways they were treating me in regards to breaks, lunches, and how they handled my ADA. They wrongfully terminated me. So I filed with the EEOC and got a lawyer. 2 months later, we settled out of court because their own lawyers told them I could destroy the company if I went to trial. Next story. HFC were an investment bank that were acquired by HSBC after being issued a massive fine for predatory lending. The thing is, though, the predatory lending never stopped. The loans terms were notorious for persuading people who had been turned down for loans to reapply after an underwriter had already declared them to be unlikely to be able to repay. The member of staff would simply change certain details, changing the job title of file clerk to professional is one example. If you wanted to know who was committing fraud at HFC, you simply had to see who was working during their lunch break, because phone calls weren't recorded during lunch. The team selling income protection plan weren't much better, though, making it sound that you were just receiving information when, in fact, you were signing up to a plan which would cost up to 40 quid a month. Then commission bonuses could be huge. I was making a head teacher's salary for what amounted to call center work, so the incentive to commit fraud, it was considerable. Then, after one member of staff was caught sending a plan out to someone who couldn't speak English, the department manager said, "I'm not angry that you did it. I'm just angry that you got caught." Next story. I worked for a prominent children's cancer charity. I documented and brought incontrovertible proof of over a decade's worth of misappropriating funds and resources, strangely stealing both from the billionaires we try to woo/placate, and especially the children we're supposed to serve, by cutting their enrichment repeatedly for special projects of the directors' and CEO's friends. Special projects that continue year after year with no outcome. I brought this to HR and the CEO. HR tried to stop me. HR got fired. CEO finally had to meet with me. I'm out now, but I dearly wish I could warn Mrs. B and the billionaires how their money is being misused, and warn the families in need that they are essentially props to the people gripping the budget and the narrative. Next story. So I didn't sign an NDA, but it was heavily implied not to talk about anything outside of business. Back in 2006 to 2007, I went to work in cybersecurity for an online casino. There were many investors that put millions in, and I was taken on a tour of sportsbook betting facilities in Costa Rica to get the basics. Well, we ended up settling in Manila, where we could get an actual license for internet casinos with a live dealer system and had video distribution systems in Taipei and Seoul. My job was strictly server and network support, but it soon expanded to hiring employees, buying equipment locally, bringing over equipment from the US, etc. Now, my boss and close friend handled all of the deals with the card rooms in Macau and getting their customers to play on our system when they were not in the physical casino. We also had 2 guys that were schmoozing in Asia for us. Well, I soon found out that they were blowing through money. While my friend was eating McDonald's and using his own miles to fly to Manila to crash at my place on the weekends when hotels were too expensive in Hong Kong, they were flying full fare first class to and from the US, staying in presidential suites, buying a pair of custom stretch Mercedes limos for some mob boss in China, etc. Now, we had a 24/7 operation in Manila with 36 dealers that just rotated between 4 tables, dealing baccarat, smiling on the camera, answering the phone calls from players to prove they were real, etc. One day, I hired a new batch of employees and they asked if they needed to perform magic. I had no idea what they were talking about, so I brushed it off. Some days I would come to work and there would be 20 girls in my lobby with their resumes because their casinos just shut down abruptly. I didn't understand because I was told these were moneymakers. Then, at one point, my friend was told by these 2 sisters that ran physical casinos in Macau that we needed to guarantee a certain percentage for our casino as their cut, and it exceeded the casino odds. They told us that's what all the other online casinos offer. I then asked my new hires what they meant by magic tricks. They told me that all the other casinos had always let them know when to alter the outcome of the hand by pulling out hidden cards. Our setup had card shoes with 8 decks that had barcodes and a reader that input them as they slid out of the shoe. They showed us how to hide cards and pull them out when they were told. Then the Chinese players would base their bets on trends, and when there would be 7 player wins in a row. They would bet heavily on banker to win the hand. That's when they would ensure the player won and the house would take a massive gain. That's when also I found out that all the casinos were doing it and loading up on cash and closing before they could be accused of cheating. Mind you, my software had to be certified by a global gaming company with offices in Vancouver, Sydney, London, etc. to ensure that the odds of our game matched what they expected they would be. We had serious concerns about cheating, but that was the only way to get players sent to our casino. At the same time, the guy that raised all the funds in Scottsdale was arrested for penny stock scams and put in federal prison. My funding was cut off and I had to fire everyone and shut down operations. The guys that were blowing through cash got cut off and I was out of the job. In addition to the loss of my job, they ensured that my signature was on all of the contracts since I was the only US-based person with boots on the ground in Asia. I had people following me home and waiting in the lobby of my building trying to shake me down for payments. While all of this was going on, I started digging into some of the people involved. One of the guys spending all of the cash on his travel was arrested in California for making counterfeit baby formula that was sold all over the San Francisco Bay Area. They got him on camera loading trucks, affixing security labels on the cans, making deliveries to Safeway, etc. Somehow, he got off with nothing. He was also bribing Native American organizations to get access to their gambling licenses and got arrested for that, and somehow got off with nothing. Next story. I helped cover up a radioactive leak and I lied about it. In 2012, I was a young physicist at Gustave Roussy Hospital working in internal radiotherapy. We treated patients by injecting them with radioactive substances and then imaging them with PET or SPECT. Because the patients were radioactive afterwards, they had to remain in their rooms. The radioactivity left their bodies mainly through urine, so their urine was always radioactive and was stored in containers on the lower floors till radioactivity goes below a threshold, and then emptied. The problem was that on one day, the containers were full. The decision was made way above me that they were to be emptied while still fairly radioactive and diluted with 3,000 liters of water into the main Parisian wastewater stream. This was apparently done within procedure and happened regularly. The ASN and the water company were informed, and everything was officially cleared. The issue was that a journalist got wind of it. To avoid public panic, the official explanation given was that it had been an accident caused by a broken valve. The Ministry of Defense, whom knew about it, still decided to replace the containers to new ones. Next story. GoFundMe claims they make their money off of tips that patrons leave when they donate to a fundraiser. This is false. They're really taking from the payment processing fee you get charged when you leave a donation. This means they profit from all the worst events, like catastrophic fires, medical fundraisers for people's cancers, funeral campaigns, and so on. This company is so scummy. Donate directly to the person fundraising instead. Next story. Excedrin Express gels work slower than regular Excedrin. Express is a term by the FDA for dissolving under a set time. Regular Excedrin does it faster as there is no gel shell on the outside of the pill. Then passing test means no matter what you find, as long as the values are in check, it's good to ship. Even if you find a rat and a giant sugar crystal at the bottom of the liquid sugar tank that you made kids' cough syrup out of. Next story. I worked for a car company, a major one. A new car built by my company leaves somewhere traveling at 60 miles per hour. The rear differential locks up. The car crashes and burns with everyone trapped inside. Now, should we initiate a recall? Take the number of vehicles in the field, A, multiply by the probable rate of failure, B, multiply by the average out-of-court settlement, C. A times B times C equals X. If X is less than the cost of a recall, we don't do one. Next story. I used to consult for banks, and all my NDAs finished expiring this year. So here's one that's on top of my mind. If you live paycheck to paycheck and often pay overdraft fees, you should check with your bank about their posting order to make sure you're not paying unnecessary fees. Banks can manipulate the order in which they process your transactions each night to maximize the fees you pay. They're not supposed to do this in a way that is disadvantage for the customer, but there is a lot of room for play and very little enforcement. Bank examiners, they don't always check this, so I have seen some banks get away with some pretty raunchy stuff for a long time. And even when they do get caught, the examiners just make them change the setting and there's no compensation or whatever. There's really no law behind this. It's just examiners flexing their muscle or using the almost powerless, now largely defanged CFPB if possible. So what am I talking about exactly? For example, let's say you start the day with $500 in your checking account. Then let's say you wrote a check yesterday for $300. That will come through today. You swipe your debit card a few times today for $5, $100, $15, $25, $50, $75, in that order chronologically. An automated bill pay also goes out tonight for $100. Throughout the day, the bank memo posts those transactions but doesn't fully process them until nighttime. If you just summed these items up, you would be overdrawn by $170 total. A maximally honest bank would probably just charge you a single $25 overdraft fee, ODF, on top of owing them the $170 difference for a total of $195 owed as long as you pay them back within their terms, i.e. quickly. But most banks don't play quite this fairly, and if they do, they will probably advertise it as a selling point. But what about a maximally dishonest bank? Well, they could reorder the posting process largest to smallest and charge you an ODF every time a charge hits and you don't have the funds to cover it. So in this case, your check plus the 2 times $100 debits would drain your entire $500 balance first. Then you would owe an ODF for each of the other 5 smaller charges. So now you have the original $170 balance difference plus $125 in ODFs for a grand total of $295. Yup, they made an easy $100 more just by manipulating the process order. A bank would probably not be able to get away with this long term, but nothing really stops them from trying. That's juicy income just sitting there. In poor people, how banks make most of their money. They even have software. The most popular one is called Profit Stars that shows them who their best customers are. Nope, it's not the rich guy that has a bunch of rental property loans. The bank's best customer is a single mom living paycheck to paycheck and paying $200 a month in ODFs when the bills don't align perfectly with her paychecks. Hell, I saw one bank that processed debits first and then credits each night, which is about as evil as you can get. So customers could go OD, get charged a fee, then their paycheck would process and instantly cover it. That bank got shut down for doing all sorts of nefarious stuff, but I'm sure they're not the only one that tried it or something similar. I even had a bank CEO ask me if it would be okay to change it to a fairer process right before examiners arrive for their scheduled exam and then change it back after they leave. And I had to tell him the truth. Yeah, he could probably get away with that. Examiners aren't going to dig through countless historical transactions to spot behavior like that. They will just ask for the bank's core configuration settings and review a few recent samples of transactions to verify in the moment. And oh, once I had a bank CEO argue with me that largest to smallest processing is more consumer friendly because the customer's rent and major bills are more important to pay than smaller transactions if the bank decides to decline them. Now, but what if the bank was more cautious with the rules but still wanted to make plenty of ODF income? Well, there are plenty of options in the middle ground of this that still boosts ODF income without being quite so nefarious. For example, they can just change the posting order by type rather than individual transactions. They could process checks, ACH, wires, and bill pay first, then debit card transactions last. Even without playing with the debit card item order, let's just say they post them in the order they come in, they will still generate more ODFs because checks, ACH, bill pay, and wires tend to be the largest transactions anyway. They can also set it to random order or item sequence order, like your check numbers. I'm sure there are more options that are out there, but banks can also set a de minimis that doesn't ODF you for overdrafts under some tiny number like $5, but they don't all do that. With all of that said, check with your bank to see what they do. Even better, get it in writing and catch them lying to you. There are honest banks out there that don't play games like this. Of course, or at least keep it to a minimum. Don't be afraid to change to a better one. Changing banks is not nearly as difficult as some people think. I used to recommend that most people just use credit unions because they are the least likely to be evil, but the flip side is that the credit unions are the most likely to be run by incompetent people and have the worst technology, so pick your poison when it comes to that. Alright, y'all, so I read that story and sometimes I just read things and I don't really know what's happening, but I'm just here for the ride. And I have to say, I have no idea what OP was talking about. I do understand what OP meant. Banks are greedy and they're charging you, but the nitty gritty, I didn't get that. I didn't understand it. Maybe it's because I have a credit union. Mine treats me pretty good, but maybe I need to look for some incompetence. But yeah, banks are evil. And I'm going to tell you something, and this might sound a little anti-Semitic, guys. Banks are secretly run by the bankers. I bet you didn't know that. Now you know. Watch out for them on the street. Anyway, next story. So, in 2015, after its founder Fred DeLuca passed away, Subway had a corporate meeting where they announced that they had reduced the quality of their food as low as they possibly could, resulting in X amount of dollars being saved. I watched an entire arena of franchisees stand up and cheer like they had just won the lottery. It was terrifying. Next story. Underwood Ranch is using red dye in their sauces, but not reporting it on the ingredients list because they're exploiting a current loophole in regulations. They know it's wrong and unethical, and that eventually they'll have to declare it or exclude it, and both will hurt their business. But they want to rake in as much cash as possible before then. This is actually pretty obvious to anyone who actually looks at their sauces. You don't naturally get that atomic red color. Every other sauce that's anywhere near that shade has coloring additives listed. Next story. USA Doctor here. No NDA, but still something people don't talk about. Hospital staff absolutely discriminate based on race, gender, sexuality, or any other metric, and there is literature to show this. If you're overweight, female, black, or just generally not white, you are less likely to get pain medication, antibiotics, procedures, or other treatments you need based on any number of excuses. Of course, being a jerk is the biggest deciding factor in all of those circumstances, but the other stuff matters too. But here's the big thing. The hospital will bend over backwards to support any staff member or administrator who shows up as a patient. It goes without saying that someone who works at that hospital would receive preferential treatment, as with any industry, but I remember as a resident treating a guy who was having a heart attack at the cath lab staff literally beat me to the room. That never happens. Sure, he was having a heart attack, but I've literally seen patients wait hours before going up. And that's if you can convince the cardiologist of what's happening. Spoiler, if you're a female doctor, you're less likely to do that because many doctors are sexist AF. Shortly after, I saw men in suits around his room and learned this was the father of one of the hospital administrators. If you're female or a minority, just never go to the ED alone if you can avoid it. Have a family member or a friend there to help advocate for you and clarify the situation. Remember that most of us are genuinely trying to help, but there are some who might try to write off your concerns for a faster resolution. Never be afraid to ask the doctor to slow down and listen to your concerns. Next story. The subprime lending market doesn't care if you can afford your bill. The way they make their money is by packaging and reselling your debt. I used to work for a bank that's a Sandler subsidiary, and I helped to write the algorithms that helped to determine whether or not an applicant would get auto-approved, conditional approved, or rejected. The interest rates were absolutely nuts, 29% APR. On a call with the C-suite execs and board, and I was told it didn't matter if people could actually afford it. They were targeting people who could make their payment for 3 to 6 months because that's how long the company had to keep the debt on the books before they could package it up and resell it to someone else. And if the customer did default, they could have their vehicle repossessed and auctioned off/resold by a lot that had a strategic agreement with the lending company, and the customer was still on the hook for the debt. It was never about finding people who could pay off their car. It was just about milking as much monthly fees. A subscription service to desperation, as one of my coworkers put it. Next story. The ingredients you find in your frozen pizza are basically leftovers from other products. That's why they're so cheap. Then, a $5 t-shirt and a $500 t-shirt came from the same place and cost about $1 a piece to be made to the brand, and about 25 cents to the factory. That said, a 25-cent true cost can end up as high as $500, logo stitching including. But I guess most people knew it, yet they keep giving away those extra $495 for status. In my opinion, that kind of status is just idiocracy. Next story. When you buy a mattress from Satva and they haul away your old one for free, it isn't being recycled as advertised. It's going straight to the local landfill. Despite what they claim on their website, the mattresses also aren't actually made in the US. The components are manufactured overseas and are simply assembled here. The company also required call center employees to whitewash their names. The owners, who have been friends since childhood, run the business together, and the culture reflects it. And the pricing? The markup is enormous, around 50 to 60%. It is all by design. Next story. So, I worked at an indoor grow that no longer exists. They had me fill out an NDA that I never signed and they forgot to retrieve. Now, they had me separate flower that I am fairly certain ended up going to another state for sale. We would wear outside shoes inside while harvesting, and management were discussing using stepped-up nugs to press for oil. Our dry room had a leak and was the last room to be designed. An enormous space with incredibly high ceilings. We used oscillating fans. The trim team was in charge of finding mold, but that was really it. We'd have leaks dripping directly on colas in grow rooms from the AC not having the dehumidifier tray emptied. Then the master grower once used concentrated hydrogen peroxide to clean a humidifier and left it running during normal work hours, and a manager walked in and got blasted in her eyes and had to go to the ER. I believe she was okay. Then I got a work injury once and they suddenly didn't have accident report forms. I had to go through state government to get their insurance information. And I learned from an employee of Select that they, at the time and his location, would scoop up any leaked contents of cartridges into other carts or back in and just rename them. Then you know how grows aren't supposed to be near schools? Well, we were across the street from one. The Big Cheese bought them a new gym. Then the Big Cheese were probably involved with the Russian mafia, probably. The head would walk around with $1,000+ shoes. Small old man with a terrifying aura. He had an assistant who was friendly to me. He would describe showing up at people's homes his boss was unhappy with and dealing with them. So yeah, take what you will of that. Still though, it was one of my favorite jobs, and would be by far if HR wasn't absolutely horrific and didn't fixate on me. I was one of their 2 most seasoned employees, personally trained by the master grower, and on the ground floor and helped build the place without any experience. The HR was supposed to be a grower, but messed up and made it my problem since she couldn't take it out on the master grower. He was the little brother of one of our main investors after all. Next story. Alright, I've got one. Paul McCartney and all of the Beatles are bi. Met a former agent producer before they blew up. They were not located in London yet, but outside and much smaller. They had many parties with men/women mixed, and even some did it with each other. The producer/agent did not want to leave her small town and did not go to London, where they then got very popular. Also, at least 2 members slept with Ono later on. Next story. Not a secret that falls under NDA, but one most people do not know. If you boycott spending money in online games but still play them, you are not making a difference. A drop in total active players will mean more to a studio than a drop in revenue. I have worked on 3 well-known live service games. All of them would have emergency meetings if we saw a significant dip in engagement time. The largest fear in the industry right now is losing players to things like TikTok, easy to get into and endless content. We can work on converting people to buy stuff if they are in the game, but we cannot as easily convince someone to leave TikTok to play our game. Next story. I worked for a global not-for-profit, very large, almost everybody has heard of it. On one hand, it was effectively an elite social club where very rich people would be courted from all over the world for the main family who ran the not-for-profit. On the other hand, were the local offices in many countries. These offices were often corrupt as crap. They would also be run by prominent families in their countries, but it turns out that many third-world prominent families got that way by stealing everything they could get their hands on. And our funding was no exception. With that said though, without these people, our mission had no chance of succeeding in those places, so we looked the other way and hoped they didn't steal too much, as long as they could show some progress. Next story. To sell food in the EU, you need to scientifically prove it is safe. In the US, you only need to self-certify that it's safe. Same with airframes. Airbus needs to prove to the regulator that their A800 is safe. Boeing just tells the regulator that they believe their 737 MAX is safe. This is how people die. US manufacturers are not required to care for people's health like EU manufacturers are, and so they don't. Next story. The City of New York COVID hotline, established shortly after the COVID outbreak, was supposed to be managed by a certain contractor. Additionally, they had been supporting New York City's 411 information line. They could not meet the required service levels agreed upon under contract. It was contractually agreed upon all calls would be answered within 10 seconds. So they outsourced to another company to maintain the service level promised. However, they did not disclose they had sought out additional support from another BPO, business process outsourcing company. That company hired from temp companies and provided minimal training, required employees to use their own equipment and pay for the internet for working from home. The supervisors over these employees had zero leadership as far as coaching and developing talent, and would terminate employees who were temp at the drop of a hat without diligent investigation, as they were temps and would not have to deal with unemployment issues. In their defense, they received minimal to zero training in leadership, coaching, and basically were taught to check boxes and show up at team meetings. Zero development opportunities, huge waste of company resources, 100% turnover, constant training classes, constant attrition. There was no structure to documentation of coaching, progress reports, or feedback for negative behaviors. Complete crap show. Your tax dollars. Eventually, the funds ran out, and now they support NYC 411 information lines solely. Employees who knew about this additional company bailing out the primary company to get the job done for the city of New York were asked to keep the secret. I bailed the week the NDAs were sent out to sign. I wanted no part of that. I still regret that I accepted the position when I was asked to join the leadership of the BPO hired by the company, hired by NYC. Started out much downplayed as, let's just keep this to ourselves, and then turned it into a complete train wreck. Complete crap show of a mom-and-pop company that bit off more than it could chew with antiquated business practices regarding how to manage a customer service contact center. Still don't know to this day if it's still going on with the NYC 411 service. Next story. Traverse City, Michigan frequently has the beach in front of the state park closed for E. coli, which they blame on geese and other migratory birds. The truth is that the Traverse City sewer system is so old and in such a state of neglect that they have cedar logs hollowed out for pipes that are starting to rot and leak. Next story. This will never get far up because I'm writing it so late, but F it. So, many years ago, maybe late 2011 or early 2012, I think, I got a job at Microsoft. I don't want to say too much, but I was able to talk to some people about the recent Xbox Live issue. There was an issue where people were having account issues were calling into Xbox. If it had anything to do with fraud or purchases on Xbox Live or whatever, protocol was to freeze your account until the issue was resolved. This usually was cleared within 24 to 48 hours. Problem was, it was taking a month or more. And you won't effing believe why, though. This is going to sound so stupid. So anytime Xbox decided to refund/credit your account, obviously this may have changed since then, what happened was a simple Excel spreadsheet each day. Each time an account needed this, it was forwarded to a specific person. Yes, a person, let's call them Dave, who would get out all of the data and add it to the spreadsheet and sent to someone in the main office to process the refunds. So Dave was doing his job and sending the spreadsheet daily. He would send them to a person, let's say it's Joe, and Joe would go through it and get people their credits, refunds, or whatever. This could be from false purchases, fraud, and so forth. Well, Joe in the main office took a month off. Apparently, he didn't tell Dave. So each day, hundreds of refunds requests were going to no one. It was just going to Joe's email box. No one had been notified, and no one was the wiser. This caused massive issues. I think they had to greatly increase the size of the care team who processed the initial fraud inquiries. Big part of the problem was they were inundated with calls from customers wondering why their accounts weren't released. Remember, they are locked. These people couldn't log in just to play, and which alongside the newer calls was just way too much. It took the team several months to catch up. Before I left, something else amazing was happening also. You see, Xbox had recently, within 6 months of that event, did this major software type update that forced people to sign into their Xboxes. Sounds like no biggie, but holy hell, you'd be surprised how many people had an Xbox that auto-logged them in, that they had no idea what their password was, and calling in to get help. Another issue that caused huge issues. So they were doing another update. The bosses panicked and started hiring out their ass. The center that took the fraud complaints was literally being doubled. All of this in case of an update that caused the same login issue. The thing was, the new update had nothing to do with that and wasn't going to cause any issues. The main accounts specialist in our area was trying to tell the bosses that, but they wouldn't listen. They were hiring like 70 people for nothing. They weren't even able to handle the people they were hiring, so people were losing their personal space. As well, they had to share their cubicles now. Their cubicles were pretty big, but still everyone was upset about it, and then probably fired all of them like a month or two later. Next story. I don't think this even breaks my NDA, which is quite old at this point, but Apple had the most pretentious stick up its ass with security and secrecy during the Steve Jobs days, when you're working as a film crew on a commercial for a new release, or even a normal commercial. They had special security to tape your phone and check your social media if you were taking set photos or leaking anything. They still do, but it's not the same as back then. Next story. story. Your favorite cooking show on Food Network is rigged. They know exactly who is going to win and create the show around that person winning. One of the things that you don't see are the 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. full filming days just to be told to wear the same exact outfit the next day. Unwashed, crusty, and stinky to do it all over again. There's so much more. It's awful and damp, inhumane, and they get away with it because people just want their 15 minutes of fame, including me. My 15 minutes of fame, plus 3 other contestants on my season, caused us all to be admitted into outpatient therapy within months of coming home. Next story. That Watch Dogs 2 was in development. Back in my early 20s, I did game news for a friend's website and managed to get press access to Eurogamer Expo here in the UK. They were showing off Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and I managed to get my hands on and chat with the PR/dev team. During the interview, I asked if they had any issues in implementing the horse and carriage systems into the Assassin's Creed world, as this was the first time they'd had vehicles in the games. They said, "No, we actually reached out to the Watch Dogs team as they were working on Watch Dogs 2, and they helped us to get it working correctly." At the time, we had no idea Watch Dogs 2 was in development. A look of panic shot over the PR person's face when I pressed and I said, "Oh, Watch Dogs 2?" To which they looked me dead in the eyes and said, "We're gonna really need you to sign something after this press release." And I kept my word and got an email a few months later saying that the reveal event is on XYZ date, and thanks for not breaking the embargo/NDA. Got a review copy of the game and a hoodie to boot. Y'all, I just want to say something. You ever just have a food or a movie or a game and you're like, maybe this isn't that good, but I like it? For me, it was Watch Dogs 2. I didn't mind that game. It had some heart. I liked the characters. Watch Dogs 3 was an absolute piece of crap. But did you know your fellow narrator had a gaming news website for a while? I started writing for some other guy like back in 2014, and I just did like game journalism, like news, no reviews or anything like that. I didn't know what I was doing, but we made articles, and then a few years later, I was like, I'm going to open a badpassword.com, and then I started writing my own stuff, and I got my own writers, and then one guy actually got a job in the video game industry because of me, so he owes me his life. But anyway, it's defunct now, and now it's my voice acting page, but rest in peace, a badpassword.com gaming news. Anyway, next story. So, not under any NDA, but sharing what I have found regarding window company door-to-door salespeople. I was looking for new windows for my house, contacted what I thought was a reputable dealer. They sent out a sales agent to measure and run numbers. The agent did all of their measurements, said they had to go run numbers, and they will get back to me in a few minutes. The agent went to his car, appeared to make a phone call or two, came back and said they could do all the windows, removal, repair, and install for just under $22,000. Mind you, my house at the time was 950 square feet and had maybe 15 windows total. It was an older home and had older windows, so I assumed there would be some measurement variances. I didn't sign with them as I plain outright told them I wanted to get a few other quotes. He was pushy about signing it, and it was difficult to get him to leave. For the next 10 to 12 days, I was getting other quotes, and this sales agent kept calling and miraculously reducing the quote each time. At one point, he told me that his CEO approved a once-in-a-lifetime offer of $8,000 out the door, no questions asked. Just sign and we'll be there tomorrow. Quote, 2 days after that, I signed with another company that quoted me for $3,500 for the same work. In talking to the rep for the company I signed with, he knew immediately the company that quoted me $22K and told me that they are predators on people like me and the elderly. They come out, play up how bad your windows are, and make you think that the house will fall apart tomorrow if you don't get the windows done soon. Next story. The copier dealership I worked for was using the Microsoft Action Pack software for their production environment. This is a huge no-no within Microsoft because the Action Pack was intended for development only. My employment was abruptly terminated after about 3 years working there. I reported them immediately to Microsoft, potentially costing them thousands in software licenses. I received a letter from Microsoft a year or so later stating that they had found no such abuse of their terms of service. That can only mean the company spent a bunch of money purchasing new servers and software. Also, the head of IT was dumb. His naming convention was computer name web server 1, username web server 1, password web server 1. We got hit with a NIMDA Trojan and it spread like wildfire because he didn't want me to enforce/implement basic security measures. Our customer database was exposed to who knows what. Well, I spent a week or more cleaning all of the computers in the office when I could spare time in between my normal activities. Our customer management software ran in a VM or VMware. Instead of him actually purchasing a valid VMware license so we could have support, management, and backup capabilities, we used VMware Player, which at the time wasn't supported for commercial use. So I had to come up with a batch script to shut it down at least 3 times a week and back it up to tape using backup exec. So firing me from that place was the best thing that ever happened to me, though. I won't disclose the business because it's a local copier dealership and could potentially give away my location, though I'm sure this type of behavior isn't just a one-off. Next story. There is a popular application used in France that allows you to send money to and from accounts, like PayPal or Wero. I worked for the people who provided access to banking accounts to this app. Let me tell you that when you put your banking info in the apps, it was stored where I worked, and the security was very loose. I could get and use the account info of all clients. It was required, but being able to do that was quite shocking. I could basically see all the life of one person, where their savings are, where they do their groceries, where they ate, their loans, their mortgage. Next story. My NDA with a tech consulting firm expired last year. The secret isn't a hidden gadget, but how much psychological data is actually used to predict your next emotional low. We weren't just tracking what you buy, but when you're most vulnerable to making an impulsive decision based on sadness or loneliness. The algorithms are designed to know you're going through a breakup or a personal crisis before you even tell your friends. The goal was always frictionless happiness, providing a digital distraction exactly when reality starts to hurt. Seeing that from the inside is why I now write about the dangers of a perfect controlled world. It's not a conspiracy, it's just very efficient, very cold business. Next story. I don't have an NDA, but I can crap on and name and shame slumlords? I really wish I could. She's also a fraud using this faith warrior title for a supposed charity she flaunts on LinkedIn. It's all fake. She threatened my special needs daughter as well as left us without AC for 3 months right after we moved in during the hottest months, but claims they're deeply charitable humanitarians. Wretched people. But that so-called charity she flaunts is entirely fake. Don't even get me started on their shady landlord practices. Locals to me should know not to rent their houses. Next story. That a lot of the news is just based on press releases from different companies and organizations who then collect their own press clippings to reassure themselves that they're still relevant. I worked for TV, radio, print news clipping transaction agency for 10 years, then had one educational institution who'd invite the media to announcements, but neither TV, radio, or the paper would bother reporting on it. They'd call us and yell us for not doing our job, and we'd tell them there were no news items at all about their big announcement. They got so desperate that they eventually changed their name just to get any attention. Next story. So, not really an NDA, but all the people that told me not to say it are gone, and other people talk about it openly, so what happened was, I caught my boss lying about leaving work early for meetings, taking long lunches, or going to conferences when he just went home. That led to some deeper investigating, and it turned out he was using Craigslist to solicit services with other men, leave work early to meet up with them, and then would go home to his wife and kid. And if he sees this post, dude, don't leave your secret Yahoo email account logged in and open on your unlocked computer when you leave early. I unfortunately had to see some tiny things, but the mere mention of what I saw to HR was enough to get him canned. He was allowed to resign in lieu of getting fired, and he asked that we not tell his family. Next story. If you have an account with Dish Network, they have a private credit score for you. The score is based off of how profitable you are, and it determines how far customer service is willing to go to make you happy. If your service is out for a few days and you call in, if you have a top-tier package, they're probably going to offer you a discount and maybe a couple of free pay-per-views. If you just have the basic package, you're probably only going to get a hearty apology. Next story. Worked for Tik Tok in their trust and safety department in Amsterdam. There is a lot of gory violence and adult content people are trying to post on there a lot, and the AI, when I was there, wouldn't pick it up. One thing I thought was icky is for girls and women, we would use a tool to measure how much skin was showing in the chest area from between the breasts to the nape of the neck to determine if too much was exposed, and then would mark it to have it restricted views. This resulted in women and girls having much more restrictions on their views for wearing very common tops. Also, when we would moderate comments, we only had around 5 seconds to determine context for the comment, and in many cases would over/under moderate comments. And the comments wouldn't always show what comment they were responding to. Part of the rules were there had to be a clear target for bullying, so they would need to refer to a specific person in their bullying statement. Otherwise, if they use they or it or she/he when there are multiple she/he in the video, it wouldn't count as bullying, or if the person they are bullying isn't fully visible. This is why many people were able to be bullied online with no recourse from TikTok. Another thing, we couldn't see your full TikTok account. We could see a video or a comment, but not the entirety. There were cues like video queue and comment queue. However, Remember, we used to have access to a program that allowed us to pull up other videos from someone's account by putting in certain information. One day, I had a concerning video come across to moderate, but it didn't quite fit any moderation criteria. Guy was looking out of blinds in his home, and some girl, school age in her school uniform, walked past. His caption had something kind of vaguely describing seeing her again, like he'd been watching her, so I put his info in this other proprietary software and pulled up his account. He's been stalking this girl and suggesting in his captions that he will mutilate her genitals, kidnap her, SA her, etc. None of these videos being flagged. The AI didn't pick them up, so I contacted ERT and alerted them. They got back to me and said, "We normally do not reach out to agents after to give feedback on the result of the issue they raised, but we wanted to reach out and thank you. That man has been arrested." A week later, they remove our access to that proprietary software though. They would also occasionally save certain videos to use as a calibration tool for our sites. One day, they pushed a video of a guy putting a kitten in a blender and turning it on to all of us in the office, unnecessarily exposing all of us to that. A note about this was we aren't allowed to just stop watching once we see one bad thing. We have to watch the videos to their entirety in case there are multiple bad things, so the AI is trained appropriately. Because what if the guy smokes a cigarette after blending the cat? And then, last thing, I was selected to be a part of a small group of people who would all be moderating the exact same videos so they could calibrate our responses in hopes it would help train the AI. This did look positively on my work record, so I got chosen for other calibration groups. One was to calibrate our more violent videos, so videos showing mutilation, violence, death in a real or non-real setting. This was hundreds of videos instead of a normal 20 to 40, which meant us in the group watched 8 hours of varieties of graphic violence, including machete beheadings. All of this while they also pushed the typical corporate culture BS. We were offered free therapy. I had a nice lady from Ireland as my therapist, and she told me to quit my job. My supervisor also said our job was not stressful and wrote a mean review about me, and my contract was not renewed. The office shut down a few months later. Next story. Not under NDA, but while in the Army on deployment, I helped initiate an Inspector General investigation into my platoon leader. Company commander didn't give a crap because she was having sex with multiple of the enlisted directly under her command, male and female, which is a big no-no in the military. Myself and the others that reported were ostracized on development and even denied promotions for reasons, and the accused officer was sent home and promoted shortly after. Officers/NCOs engaging in misconduct is a common occurrence in the military. Next story. So, Hasbro signed Adam Sandler on to do a Lord of the Rings-style epic with a comedic twist using the Candyland property. They never went forward with the project, though. They also have a shelved pitch packet for a Stretch Armstrong movie, which at the time they had hoped would star Taylor Lautner and have the tone of The Dark Knight. Then they sent undercover employees to cons to try and convince people to draw Hasbro-licensed characters for the purposes of being able to sue them into going out of business. And they know most of the MLP stuff is bought by bronies and sent undercover bronies to cons to sniff out what the boys want in the next batch of toys. Next story. So back in the 1990s, I was church secretary for the biggest a-hole Baptist preacher in California. Not only did he corner me in the supply closet more than once, he lifted his leg in shorts at a meeting and showed me his bits and bobs. They weren't impressive either. But the worst thing he did? Burned down the church for insurance money. Oh, and expected me to lie to the insurance company about fictitious losses. So yeah, left the church and the religion and believe that Baptist clergy in particular are rancid, evil trolls. Next story. The company I worked for had a branch on the other side of the country that was failing due to every employee being a new hire. Relative to industry experience, needed to do the job effectively. I saw opportunity there and offered to move out there and get this where they should be. Spent the next 10 months working my ass off to get everything back where it needed to be. I worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week. Was salary-based, so wasn't given overtime. My efforts, they paid off though. The newer staff became much more knowledgeable and adept with handling our customers. We went from most underperforming branch to within striking distance of the top spot. When I landed, we were negative 33% behind our yearly targets. And when all of this happened, we were about 28% over targets. Life's great. Until I intercepted an email chain I wasn't supposed to see. I was covering for someone out sick and thus had their emails auto-forwarded to myself. It included my boss, the head of company, and even the head of HR, amongst others. They were documenting my behaviors to an insane degree, bathroom breaks on a per-second basis, etc., and brainstorming ways to either have me fired or, as they put it, ideally make me want to quit. They had been going on for about 2 months at this point, coincidentally starting around the time I came out as gay at work. And it was World War III when I responded to the chain with a reply all. I signed an NDA and was given some shut-up money so I wouldn't undo all the goodwill and reputation that they had built up over the time that I was there. Next story. Sallie Mae was paying private debt collection companies to collect on its own debts, while purposely making it hard for borrowers to pay back so they could increase the fees. The debts were still in-house technically because they bought the private companies. They created a loan rehabilitation program that pulls the debt out of default and back into good standing, but they don't tell the borrowers that they are going to take on an extra 30%. So they got sued and created Navient to control the debt collection company slide while still practicing the same way. Navient would take over the debts when borrowers defaulted. So these people would enter a rehab program for their loan that just defaulted a month ago, set up rehabilitation payments, and at the end of their balance would balloon 30-some% out of nowhere. The CEO of one of the private debt companies in SW, Ohio left when Navient was selling companies amidst another lawsuit and became a church pastor at a mini-mall. This career-spanning scam artist now preaches to a congregation. Next story. On the 2nd of August 1990, Iraq's surprise invasion surprised everyone, or so the US government said. They said there were no troop buildup on the border with Kuwait, except we were monitoring them on commercial satellites and you could plainly see the buildup on infrared. That was not the purpose of the satellites we were using, but it was plainly obvious. So when the US government said they had no idea about the buildup, it was an outright lie. In addition, Kuwait is in a bowl. At the rims were balloons with sensors, so the Kuwaiti royals could evacuate as soon as the Iraqis came over the berm. Next story. Never had to sign an NDA for this, but there's a place in my town that cares for people with intellectual disabilities, and holy crap, the standards are hell in there. While I was working there, a client with polydipsia, a constant unending thirst, was allowed to drink several gallons of caffeine-filled soda in one day. They died that night. 2, a worker was caught doing meth in the employee bathroom. It was never addressed, and I think they still work there. And 3, one other worker confessed smoking weed to the state inspectors. It's illegal here, and they did eventually leave, but they weren't fired. There's probably quite a few more things that happened that I'm unaware of, but those are the big things that I remember hearing. Next story. Banks operate on mainframe softwares that were written in the 70s and 80s called cores. They are extremely out of date and are the reason things like you can't get up to the second interest calculations, you can't instantaneously transfer money, you can't immediately see an expenditure on your account. They are still in use by every modern bank in the world to this day. They don't know fully how they work and are terrified to touch them. This means that there could, and very likely are, fundamental flaws, holes, and backdoors in these systems that have existed for half a century or more that simply do not get changed because doing so risks the cash cow. These companies are widely referred to in the industry as a cartel, and anytime anyone tries to get a state-of-the-art approach to cores, one of these companies sweeps in, purchases them, and sinks the product, as maintaining the status quo with these obsolete technologies and simply using that money to purchase and kill your competition is more profitable than working to modernize it. All right, y'all, I hate the banks. I hate them even more now. I really hate the banks. The banks are secretly controlled by the bankers, and I don't care who knows it. I don't care if I get canceled, but I hate them. I hate them so much. Anyway, next story. So, I coined the term semi-automated counter-propaganda for a software system that is a real thing used to manipulate you on social media, and that swung the 2016 US election, amongst others. I helped architect this system and build the MVP. Basically, there are 4 personas/quadrants that exist in the two-party political system. First, your party's best, well-spoken, educated, make solid points, do no wrong. Your party opponent's best. Your party opponent's worst, crazies, racists, idiots, fringe, far-leaning extremists, and your opponent's party's worst. Now, the system spun up puppet bot accounts en masse that operates could use to push narratives by engaging with your party's best personas, silencing your party's worst personas, and doing the opposite for your opponent's party, silencing their best argue, and rage bait and challenge, while promoting and sharing and pointing out their worst. This was built on top of technology that allowed operators to impersonate real, valid human beings with real names, real phone numbers, and real IPs, but with false flag attribution through a global proxy network. We were a TS/CI DoD contractor that pivoted from working for major Wall Street hedge funds and built some of the scariest yet most effective data intelligence tools, and we're just a bunch of early 20s engineers. Very fun, but when things got hairy and unethical, I spoke up, and I got canned. Company no longer exists, so NDA is irrelevant now. Next story. Binks Buds or Old McDonald's Farm in Mattawa, Washington, 2019 to 2020. Worked for them for half a year. It was a cannabis farm. They'd get 2 to 3 shipments of weed a week from another farm, 200 to 250 large plastic bins each day. More than half of that fresh-cut weed was moldy to hell, though. We would lay it on metal wire to dry outside and have to pick the mold out. Not all of it got picked out. As we were trimming it, we would have to find moldy weed and pick it out. As we were packaging it, if there was mold, we would pick it out. So much moldy weed made it to the sale floor and in concentrates. Next story. In the early 2000s, I worked as an oil interior designer for an oil heiress. Sometimes the job was very glamorous. Other times, like this particular occasion, it meant sitting for hours supervising a wallpaper installer in the heiress's secret office hidden inside of her closet. But at some point, the fax machine started printing an itinerary. It was for a private flight to Hawaii. Passenger, their beloved standard poodle, traveling alone to meet the family. Next story. I worked for AutoZone, and they forced us to upsell customers with an emphasis on women because it was implied they would be more susceptible. Those little packets of brake grease, hose grease, or bulb grease, there are about 10 different types, all overpriced per quantity with no standard for quality. We are graded weekly on how many you sell. The more you sell, the higher you score, and the more likely it will affect your annual raise. They pretended like it was a necessary tool to complete a repair job. We also knowingly had people return used old parts for a full refund, and they didn't care that the customer was stealing from us. They would accept the old part and either restock it or return it to the distribution hub. This is why you would sometimes get parts that fail out of the box. I think the hope was that people would be too frustrated to deal with it, or that their mechanics would upcharge them for a replacement. Next story. So, I technically never signed the NDA because they didn't get the kitchen staff to sign it. We had Survivor, the cast of the show, and the 150-strong film crew staying in our holiday park in Australia. It was Cloncarry, but they were horribly demanding, rude, stole, abused people, and were generally awful. The actual NDA was heavily on how we couldn't tell people the cast of the show was staying with us while they were filming. I assumed people knew that was fake, but my aunt was shocked when she found out I was feeding their survivors on a daily basis. And screw them too. SES hated them because their film crews kept getting lost on a daily basis, so volunteers had to keep rescuing them. They kept demanding discounts. We had to bring in security measures in the kitchen because they were only paying for food for $30 when their whole crew was clearly eating there. One of them was kicked out of the park due to abusing the manager. They were awful, and they should all be ashamed of themselves. I hope to never see any of them ever again. Well, everyone, we have made it to the very end of the corrupt, super very corrupt video. I remember seeing a tweet recently, and it was somebody talking about maybe the war in Iran. I can't remember specifically, but this person mentions this thing on Twitter, and then Joe Exotic, the Tiger King, replies and makes a comment, and someone's like, "Joe Exotic, aren't you in prison?" And he's like, "It's all corrupt, honey." I love that tweet because Joe's right. How he got an iPhone in prison. But as for me, I try to provide relevant personal stories when I can. I don't really have any super top secret that occurred to me throughout the lengthy duration of this video. I'd also like to apologize to the editor. I was just not on my game today, y'all. I stumbled so many lines. So many. Just some days, you have days where you suck. Today was mine, but hopefully it won't reflect as badly in the final video. But God, I messed up a lot of lines today. But anyway, thank you guys for sticking around for the full thing. This is a longer video, but thank you all so much for watching, commenting, and have a good one. Bye-bye!